Welcome back to the video series. This is video 16 of 19, addressing step 57, where the PJR Craftsman Mark that authenticates the pen being made by me is placed. The initial PJR logo is printed out on a laser printer and then later made into a decal, and that's detailed in the earlier video. And here it is at the top of the pen barrel, and I make a engraved line and use that top about 3/8 of an inch for the mark to be placed into. This particular video is now showing where the actual Chechen pen that I've been using for the example of the 62 pen. It's a Majestic Squire. And I dip the decal. It's at the end of a little post-it note so it sticks. And then I dip it into a 2-pound shellac and then place it carefully. It's not that fragile actually, so it's not that. I carefully place it in the location, but just make sure that the excess shellac or any air bubbles that are underneath it get squeezed out, and then make a final placement. It'll slide around a little bit because the shellac is still wet. And what I like to do is I have it on the opposite side of the inscription, and so what I typically do is try to put the inscription on the prettiest or most exotic or interesting side of the grain, and then put this at 180 degrees on the opposite side. The paper strip that I'm using here now is doing three things. It's smoothing out the shellac and air from underneath the mylar, and it's also absorbing some of the excess on the edges so that I have less to try to sand off and make smooth after it's been dried. I use a little zip tie here because it's still allowing the excess to come out from underneath the mylar, and at the same time doesn't grab onto the decal to move it. Fast forward 24 hours to let the decal dry. It takes longer because of the mylar. The mylar holds some of that moisture in, so I find that if I leave it there for 24 hours as opposed to 12 hours, then it's nice and dry. I'm using a 2000 grit sandpaper here to take off the excess shellac on top of the mylar as well as around it. And now a little air compressed can to blow the mylar portion off, and I'm left with the raw decal that's actually now on the pen. In this condition, it is unprotected. So the important thing here now is to again put a layer of shellac on top. I'm using a 2-pound shellac here to put on top of the pen, and mostly to protect that raw decal, and put a layer of shellac on top of it. Now it's 12 hours in advance to have it allow it to dry. It dries faster because the mylar is off. And again, using a 2000 grit to just gently smooth out that top layer of shellac. Take again any excess shellac that has built up around the edges. And now it's time to do the final protection coat on top of the decals. Here's the inscription, the 62 pen. And now across the tradesman's mark, craftsman's mark on the top, the PJR. The CA dries very, very fast, so I mean it's a matter of a minute later that you can, make sure that it's dry, and then begin to sand it again with a 2000 grit. You might even go down to a 1200 grit because the CA is a little more sturdy, but you want to be careful not to go through it. And so this is a matter of just smoothing it out so that when it comes to the final polishing process that you have a nice clean surface to polish. One of the more advanced versions of this is I've started using a 4/0 steel wool 0000 instead of the sandpaper, and I'm finding that to be both easier to work with and a little more forgiving on going through the surface of the CA. And because it's more of a 3D sanding process and buffing process, it gets down into the crevices that the sandpaper might have a little harder chance, like what I'm trying to do now around that groove. So I hope this supported you. You learned something. Come back and see the rest of the series.